The long unanswered questions surrounding Pastor Joel Osteen have finally come into focus, and the truth isn't flattering. Each week, countless Americans flip on their TVs to hear Joel Osteen share his familiar promises of hope and prosperity, his polished smile shining from screens nationwide. Through his blockbuster books, sold-out stadium tours, and a megachurch housed in a former NBA arena, Osteen has risen to become the soft-spoken emblem of modern American Christianity. He presents himself as a preacher who teaches that unwavering faith leads to success in every part of life. Yet beneath that celebrated smile and carefully maintained public image lies a tangle of contradictions and unsettling concerns that have followed his ministry for years. From his $10.5 million home in Houston's most elite community to the startling stash of cash and checks discovered inside church walls, the contrast between Osteen's persona and the inner workings of his operation has grown too large to dismiss. A former Lakewood church staffer who spent more than 5 years close to the Osteen family explained that the Joel seen on television is a finely crafted product. The man who speaks about modesty and selflessness on Sunday lives with a level of comfort and privilege that would surprise many of his supporters if witnessed firsthand. Although Osteen often speaks about God's favor and abundance, the scale of his personal fortune and the practices of his ministry have sparked serious doubts among scholars, ex-insiders, and even longtime believers who question whether his teachings reflect Christ's original message. Dr. Michael Wilson, a religious studies professor who has analyzed America's prosperity movement for decades, observed that pastors living in mansions have always conflicted with the example of the carpenter from Nazareth. But he added that Osteen's situation signals something deeper, a deliberate reshaping of Christianity into a roadmap for wealth that avoids the harder moral lessons at its core. Perhaps most alarming are the accounts from former Lakewood staff members describing a system that behaves less like a church and more like a corporate brand, where sermon topics, outreach efforts, and even charitable decisions are shaped by market data, image strategy, and financial goals rather than spiritual guidance. When Hurricane Harvey struck Houston in 2017 and thousands were left stranded without shelter, the true nature of Osteen's ministry was exposed in a way the world couldn't ignore. And that moment continues to shadow his reputation, despite ongoing attempts to preserve his public image. Now, the long-standing questions surrounding one of America's most influential and debated religious figures are finally being pieced together, revealing the sharp divide between Joel Osteen's message and the messenger behind it, raising deep concerns about authenticity, wealth, and faith in today's religious landscape. He often repeats that God is in control and that nothing touches a believer without divine approval, a mantra he pairs with his own choices. The section known as Mansion of Faith highlights how his opulent lifestyle clashes with his spiritual teachings. Osteen's public persona leans heavily on his gentle smile, modest tone, and sermons about gratitude and God's generosity. He regularly reminds his congregation and viewers to appreciate simple blessings, stay content, and walk humbly before God. Yet that modest image hides the extraordinary level of luxury surrounding his private life, a reality that sharply differs from both his on-air demeanor and Christianity's long-held ideals of restraint and sacrifice. A former security contractor for the Osteen residence said the difference between the Joel seen on TV and the Joel behind closed doors is overwhelming. While Osteen urges people to cherish life's small gifts, he lives in an estate that would rival the homes of Hollywood's elite. His 17,000-square-foot mansion in River Oaks, Houston's wealthiest enclave, is estimated at around $10.5 million and includes multiple bedrooms, numerous bathrooms, 3 elevators, a pool house, and a separate guest house, all protected by tall iron gates. Visitors have spoken of marble floors, sparkling chandeliers, and custom woodwork throughout the property. Dr. Robert Jenkins, a scholar of the prosperity gospel, commented that preaching humility from a residence larger than many hotels reveals a deep inconsistency between Osteen's message and his reality. He noted that asking followers to be satisfied with little while living with extraordinary luxury creates an unavoidable tension.
The home is only part of a broader lifestyle that includes private flights, high-end vehicles, and designer attire that clashes with the teachings of Jesus on wealth and earthly possessions. Former staff say Osteen's suits are often custom pieces worth thousands, and he's been seen wearing watches priced above $15,000. What makes this extravagant life especially striking is how it's funded. Since 2004, Osteen has repeatedly stated that he doesn't collect a salary from Lakewood Church, a point his supporters highlight when questions arise about his fortune. Instead, his income flows mainly from his best-selling books, which have reportedly brought in tens of millions of dollars. A former publishing executive who worked with prosperity gospel authors remarked that the "I don't take a church salary" claim is one of the most effective public relations strategies ever used in religious circles. It gives the appearance of self-denial while hiding the fact that the church's platform is what drives the massive book sales in the first place. Almost like a celebrity claiming they skip a paycheck for a magazine feature, the truth is they don't need it because the exposure fuels their real earnings. In the same way, Lakewood Church operates as a tax-exempt religious institution, so its enormous former Compaq Center, once home to the Houston Rockets, avoids property taxes and isn't required to reveal its finances. Experts in religious funding suggest the church collects roughly $70 to $90 million each year through tax-free donations. Yet, unlike many long-established congregations, it offers no detailed financial reports to its members. And this same absence of transparency carries into Osteen's personal finances, where estimates of his $50 to $100 million net worth remain uncertain due to his layered business arrangements and the privacy protections given to religious groups under U.S. tax law. When early Christianity is examined, radical financial openness stands out, noted theologian Dr. Sarah Mitchell, since the Book of Acts describes believers freely sharing resources so no one suffered lack while others lived comfortably. Osteen's organization moves in the opposite direction, maintaining intentional secrecy about money that keeps followers from seeing the full reality. Former staff at Lakewood recall a workplace culture where finances were both highlighted and hidden, encouraging members to give generously as an act of faith, while the actual use of those funds stayed mostly unseen. There was always a noticeable gap between the constant push for donations and the clear wealth of the leadership, said one former administrative employee who asked to remain unnamed. We were instructed to stress that giving was about planting seeds for God's blessing, yet many staff privately questioned why a ministry with such vast resources continually asked for more contributions. That contrast becomes even sharper when compared with the economic struggles faced by many Lakewood members. Demographic data shows that many of Osteen's followers come from lower to middle-income backgrounds, often giving sacrificially despite their own limited means. You have people barely getting by, offering money they can hardly spare because they believe it will bring God's financial favor, observed Jenkins. All the while, the person urging them to give lives in a mansion and travels by private jet, raising ethical concerns that reach beyond theology into fairness and honesty. Supporters of Osteen claim his wealth mainly comes from his books and that his success justifies the rewards he enjoys. From their viewpoint, his prosperity simply reinforces the message he teaches, that faith and positivity invite God's blessings. Critics respond that this argument ignores the deeper clash between Osteen's lifestyle and Jesus' explicit warnings about riches, which emphasized generosity and cautioned against the spiritual traps of wealth. They also argue that the source of Osteen's income is irrelevant when such a vast gap between leader and congregation creates a system where those with the least are supporting someone who already has the most. The early Christian community would have been shocked by such an arrangement, Mitchell noted. Jesus never declared, "Blessed are the wealthy with jets and estates." Instead, he taught that entering God's kingdom is especially difficult for the rich. That's a message you won't hear in a typical Joel Osteen sermon, which promises that sickness won't defeat you, debt won't hold you, and closed doors won't stop you. Then came the Hurricane Harvey controversy that revealed everything. In late August 2017, Hurricane Harvey struck the Texas coast with record-breaking rain and devastating floods. As Houston submerged, thousands were displaced and desperate for shelter, shifting public focus to Lakewood Church, a 16,800-seat former arena seemingly perfect for housing evacuees.
What followed became one of the most defining chapters in Osteen's public life, pulling back the curtain on parts of his ministry that years of polished public image had hidden. As floodwaters rose and emergency shelters overflowed, social media users began asking why Lakewood Church, one of the city's largest and safest buildings, remained closed to those in need. Circulating images soon showed the church's exterior clearly reachable and mostly intact, undermining Lakewood's initial claim that severe flooding made the facility unusable. Maria Gonzalez, a Houston resident who lost her home and sought refuge across the city, recalled, "We were drowning and his doors stayed closed. We weren't looking for donations or favors, only for them to unlock a building that remains empty most days so people could stay safe and dry." As coverage spread, public anger intensified, with outlets contrasting Lakewood's shut doors against the swift action of countless smaller churches and mosques that opened immediately, despite having far fewer resources than Osteen's massive ministry. Former Houston Chronicle reporter Robert Downing, who followed the uproar, described the rapidly escalating public relations fallout. The real damage came from the clash between Osteen's constant messages about kindness and Christian compassion and the seeming unwillingness to inconvenience his institution to help people in desperate need. To many Houston residents, it felt like blatant hypocrisy. As backlash grew, Lakewood released a series of shifting statements. Initially, they insisted the church couldn't be reached. When photos challenged this, they said basement flooding made the building unsafe, a claim that still didn't explain why the upper levels couldn't be used. At last, they announced the church would open for supply distribution and later for shelter, but only after days of intense public outrage. Crisis management expert Rebecca Simon noted that the evolving explanations badly harmed Osteen's credibility. Had the church simply opened its doors right away, even with legitimate logistical issues, most people would have understood. Instead, the delays combined with shifting reasons suggested they acted to repair their reputation rather than out of genuine concern. What unsettled many further was Osteen's initial reaction. While the city was submerged, his social media continued posting routine, inspirational quotes without acknowledging the unfolding disaster or offering targeted assistance. When he finally commented directly, it came only after widespread criticism and felt more reactive than compassionate. Former Lakewood employees later disclosed that the delayed response reflected deeper internal priorities rarely visible to the public. A former facilities manager admitted there was immediate worry about potential damage to the building and equipment. Millions had been poured into audiovisual gear, carpeting, and infrastructure, and most early conversations centered on protecting those assets rather than how many people could be helped. It exposed where the true focus was placed. Other previous staff members described a leadership culture more invested in image control than in emergency action. The earliest meetings weren't about organizing aid, they revolved around messaging and managing the PR fallout, explained a former communications staffer who requested anonymity. Their concern leaned more toward public perception than toward the urgent needs of displaced families. What made the Harvey episode so revealing was how sharply it contrasted with the polished persona Osteen had curated for decades. His teachings regularly highlighted God's favor, positive thinking, and abundance, ideas that proved poorly suited for confronting real suffering when an actual crisis struck. As religious scholar Dr. Michael Wilson observed, prosperity theology seems attractive when life is smooth, but it provides few tools for dealing with hardship, sacrifice, or genuine tragedy. When Harvey arrived, Osteen's framework had no space for choosing discomfort for the sake of others, because such sacrifice doesn't fit prosperity doctrine. The difference between Lakewood's response and that of other religious groups was hard to ignore. Dozens of smaller churches, mosques, and synagogues opened instantly as shelters, even with limited means, and local furniture store owner Mattress Mac gained national praise for welcoming flood victims into his showrooms, drawing an unfavorable contrast to Lakewood's hesitation. What the Harvey crisis exposed wasn't just a media blunder, but a deeper contradiction at the core of Osteen's message, Wilson noted. His teachings center on blessings and living one's best life, but Christianity fundamentally emphasizes service, sacrifice, and placing others first, values that seemed missing in those crucial early days. Although Lakewood eventually participated in relief efforts, the damage to Osteen's public standing was long-lasting. The episode left many believing that, when forced to choose between protecting the institution and meeting urgent human needs, Lakewood chose preservation over compassion. As the city filled with floodwaters, the image of locked doors became more than a simple critique. It turned into a symbol of the widening divide between Osteen's uplifting sermons and the actual priorities of his organization during crisis. People may judge him for it, but he insists this is simply the way he chooses to live and teach from Scripture. From his perspective, he isn't preaching prosperity or dodging hardship, yet he consistently steers away from topics like sin, hell, or difficult truths. A defining trait of Joel Osteen's ministry and a key factor in his massive reach is found in what he intentionally leaves out. While historic Christian preaching stresses human sin, divine judgment, and the call to transformation, Osteen offers a curated version built on positivity.
Through every sermon, he smiles and steps around uncomfortable topics. Noted theologian Dr. Richard Martinez, who has spent 15 years examining Osteen's teachings. When you line up his messages against the Bible's content, entire categories, especially those involving human brokenness, judgment, and the costs of discipleship, simply aren't there. To anyone grounded in traditional theology, this selective messaging becomes immediately clear. Osteen rarely acknowledges sin, eliminates any reference to hell, and seldom touches on Jesus' warnings about wealth or the demand for sacrificial living. Instead, his platform revolves almost entirely around self-empowerment, uplifting thoughts, and promises of blessing. It becomes Christianity stripped of its uncomfortable edges, explained Dr. Sarah Mitchell, professor of comparative religion. Jesus spoke often about money, but usually to warn about its spiritual dangers and the call to generosity. Osteen flips this, presenting wealth as proof of divine favor. Former Lakewood insiders say this selective theology wasn't accidental, but a calculated strategy. They recalled specific discussions about what themes would connect with the target audience and what needed to be removed. Anything that might unsettle listeners or challenge their lifestyle was edited out, they said, with growth, not faithfulness, as the driving aim. This mindset shapes more than the sermons. It extends into how Lakewood handles doctrine overall. While many churches take firm stances on controversial social issues, Osteen routinely avoids clear positions on topics like abortion, same-sex marriage, or racial justice, even when asked directly. Remaining vague, a former executive pastor explained, kept the audience as large as possible. It's framed as humility, but it functions like a business tactic, he added. The avoidance of controversy continues into politics too. Unlike many pastors who address moral dimensions of public policy, Osteen maintains careful neutrality. The issue isn't his refusal to be partisan, noted ethicist Dr. James Peterson. The real concern is his refusal to express moral clarity on issues where Christianity traditionally speaks loudly. When a pastor stays silent on justice, oppression, or dignity, that silence becomes its own message. This selective model marks a major departure from Christian tradition while still claiming its authority. Historically, preaching has balanced what theologians call law and gospel, both the challenge of moral responsibility and the assurance of grace. Osteen offers comfort without obligation, blessing without cost, said Martinez. It's like serving dessert without the meal, pleasant but lacking spiritual nourishment. Former attendees described the emotional ease of this approach, especially for those weary from guilt or past wounds. When I first attended, it felt like relief, recalled former member Rebecca Johnson.
Her previous church emphasized guilt, and Osteen made her feel hopeful. But with time, she realized something essential was missing, a real call to transformation or service beyond personal improvement. This focus on positivity and personal reward, rather than sacrifice, morality, or social responsibility, has drawn criticism from theologians across the spectrum. Both conservative evangelicals and progressive scholars question whether Osteen's message is Christianity at all, or motivational speech wrapped in religious language. When Jesus spoke of taking up a cross, he wasn't promising an easy life, observed Dr. Mark Simmons. Yet Osteen removes suffering and sacrifice entirely, giving people momentary comfort but not addressing deeper needs for meaning and purpose. Osteen's handling of suffering and injustice highlights this even more. Rather than engaging with tragedy or systemic wrongs, he frames hardship as either a temporary delay before blessing or a mindset problem fixed through positive thinking. There is virtually no theological space in his teaching for dealing with real tragedy or structural injustice, said Mitchell. Faced with cancer, poverty, or oppression, the prosperity message quickly collapses into stay positive, which can feel cruel when relief never comes. What emerges is a religious product crafted for consumer culture, Christianity as self-help rather than transformation. By cutting the demands while keeping the comforts, Osteen offers a package that fits perfectly into a society built around convenience. He's learned how to help people feel spiritual without asking them to grow, concluded Martinez. Highly marketable, but deeply at odds with the faith he represents. Imagine it this way. Keeping a peace stealer close raises your chances of living stressed and overwhelmed. Behind the scenes, former staff say the ministry functions more like a corporation than a church. Away from the spotlight exists a media-driven operation focused on branding, metrics, and revenue, instead of community or formation. You weren't serving a pastor, you were serving a brand, said one former senior staffer. Every choice was evaluated based on how it affected the Osteen image, not on spiritual or theological value. This corporate model shows up in every part of Lakewood, from the high-gloss services to scripted messaging to the market research behind decisions. The organization operates like a polished media enterprise. A consultant who worked with Lakewood noted that they ran focus groups and audience tests on everything. Sermon themes, book titles, stage design, even Osteen's wardrobe, all were tested to boost appeal and avoid negative reactions. According to former staff, the same approach shaped the sermons themselves, which were put together more like media products than traditional messages. Teams chose themes based on audience metrics, collected uplifting stories, crafted memorable lines, and built emotional peaks at planned moments, said a former content developer. Osteen would personalize it, but the core product was built to retain viewers and drive actions like book sales or donations.